I sold my urban farm and agricultural technology supply chain for $12 million. My husband looked at the signed contract, then looked at me and said, "Tell your sister and your parents that you went bankrupt." I did exactly as he suggested. What happened just a few days later showed how much of a genius my husband really is. Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to test the loyalty of the people who claim to love you the most. I dropped the bomb right as my mother Clarice sliced the honey-glazed ham. I took a deep breath and said the farm went under, and Malik and I are officially bankrupt. The grand dining room of my parents' Atlanta mansion went dead silent. The warmth of the traditional Sunday dinner evaporated instantly. Clarice did not gasp in sympathy. She dropped her heavy silver fork against her fine china plate in pure, unadulterated disgust. The clatter echoed in the cavernous room, reflecting years of thinly veiled contempt. My father Vernon did not ask if we were okay. He did not ask how we were holding up or if we needed a place to stay while we figured things out. Instead, he slammed his fist on the mahogany table, making the crystal water glasses shake violently. He immediately demanded to know if I expected him to bail us out of this embarrassment. Growing up in this family meant adhering to a very specific set of rules regarding success and image. We were supposed to be the absolute pinnacle of achievement in our community. Vernon and Clarice built their entire lives around country club memberships, prominent church board positions, and the careful curation of a flawless public facade. Every Sunday dinner was less of a family gathering and more of a corporate board meeting where we were expected to present our weekly accomplishments for their approval. I sat there watching the absolute horror wash over my parents' faces. It was not horror for my well-being or the stability of my marriage. It was absolute horror that their social standing might be tarnished by association. Malik sat calmly beside me, his hand resting steadily on my knee beneath the tablecloth. He had prepared me for this exact reaction, but experiencing it in real time was still a physical blow to my chest. I looked at my father, attempting to play the part of a devastated and broken daughter. "We lost everything, Dad," I said, keeping my voice low and intentionally unsteady. "The supply chain issues finally caught up with us, and the bank is moving forward with foreclosure on the entire property next week." Vernon's face flushed a deep shade of purple. "Foreclosure," he whispered fiercely. "You are sitting at my dinner table telling me that my daughter is about to have a public foreclosure attached to our family name. Do you know who I play golf with, Zoya? Do you have any idea how fast word travels in our circles?" Clarice picked up her linen napkin and dabbed at her perfectly painted lips, refusing to even look in my direction. "I told you that organic farming nonsense was a phase," she muttered to no one in particular. "I told you it was a reckless endeavor for a woman who should have been securing a proper corporate position." Before I could even formulate a response to my mother's callousness, my younger sister Kendra leaned across the table. Her heavy designer jewelry clinked against the wood. She looked at me with a mixture of triumph and disdain. "I knew you were lying about your little dirt project making money," she sneered, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the table. "Are you going to beg for a handout now?" Kendra's husband Preston leaned back in his chair and swirled his expensive bourbon. Preston is a white commercial real estate developer who married into our family and immediately adopted my parents' elitist attitudes as his own. He wears his arrogance like a cheap cologne, always finding a way to insert his supposed financial superiority into every conversation. He looked at my husband with a pitying smirk. "Well," Malik Preston drawled, taking a slow sip of his drink, "I guess being a financial consultant does not actually translate to providing properly for your household. You let your wife play in the mud for years, and now look where it got you. Both of you are flat broke." Malik did not take the bait. He simply offered Preston a polite, tight smile that I knew masked a brilliant, calculating mind. "We hit a rough patch," Preston Malik replied smoothly. "Markets fluctuate, and we took a hit." Preston let out a loud, abrasive laugh that filled the dining room. "Real men do not let their families go bankrupt, Malik. Real men invest in tangible assets like commercial real estate, not overpriced tomatoes and community gardens. Kendra chimed in eagerly, thrilled to have the spotlight back on my supposed failures. This is exactly like when you dropped out of the pre-med track at Howard Zoya, she said, slicing her ham with aggressive precision. You always start things you cannot finish. You could have been a doctor like mom and dad wanted, but you decided you wanted to save the world with vegetables. Look how well that turned out for you. You are 35 years old and starting over from absolutely nothing. The mention of my pre-med days was their favorite weapon. I had left the medical track over a decade ago because my passion was in agricultural technology and urban farming sustainability. I had built a highly profitable business that supplied organic produce to major restaurant groups across the Southeast. But to my family, any career that did not come with a prestigious traditional title was considered a mere hobby. I looked down at my plate, playing the role of the broken, defeated sibling perfectly. Clarice sighed dramatically, placing her hands flat on the table. "Well, this changes things considerably," she announced. "As you know, the family holiday to the Bahamas is next month. Obviously, given your current financial disaster, you will not be joining us. We cannot have you bringing this depressing energy on our vacation." The absolute irony of her statement nearly made me break character. For the past 4 years, I had been the one quietly subsidizing those lavish family trips. I was the one who upgraded their standard rooms to oceanfront suites. I was the one who covered the private yacht charters and the expensive dinners, paying the resort concierge directly so Vernon and Clarice could pretend they were treating everyone. They loved taking the credit while spending my hard-earned money. "I understand, Mom," I whispered, staring at my hands. "We could not afford the flight anyway." Vernon stood up, throwing his napkin onto his half-eaten meal. "I have lost my appetite," he declared, pacing toward the hallway. "Zoya, I want you and Malik out of my house. I will not sit here and listen to you complain about a situation you brought upon yourself. Go figure out your mess, and do not expect a single dime from us. We are not sponsoring your failures. Leave before you ruin my digestion any further." Malik stood up immediately, his posture perfectly straight. He did not look angry, he looked serene. He pulled my chair out for me, offering his hand. "Let us go home, Zoya," he said quietly. We did not say another word to the people sitting at that table. We turned our backs on their sneers and judgments, walking silently through the massive foyer and out the heavy oak front doors. We stepped out into the muggy Georgia night. The moment those heavy doors slammed shut behind us, the suffocating tension shattered into a million pieces. Malik and I looked at each other in the dim light of the porch. A slow, wicked smile spread across his face, and I could not stop myself from mirroring it. My mind flashed back to 48 hours prior. We had been sitting at our own kitchen table drinking coffee on a quiet Friday morning. Malik had slid a thick stack of legal documents across the counter toward me. On the top page was a signature line establishing the absolute acquisition of my company. A massive national grocery conglomerate had officially bought my urban agricultural tech supply chain for $12 million. I had stared at the number on the paper, completely overwhelmed by the reality that my years of playing in the dirt had culminated in generational wealth. I was ready to call my parents to finally prove to them that my path was valid, that I had achieved the kind of massive success they had always demanded from me. But Malik had stopped me. He placed his warm hand over my phone and looked at me with serious, calculating eyes. "Zoya," he had said softly, "do not tell them about the money. Tell them the farm went under. Tell them we are completely bankrupt." I had looked at him like he was crazy, asking why I would ever do that. Malik had leaned in closer. "Because for your entire life they have valued your status over your heart. They only love what you can provide for their image. Let us give them the ultimate bankruptcy test. Let us see how they treat you when they think you have absolutely nothing left to offer them. If they support you, then we share the celebration. If they throw you away, then we finally cut the cord forever." Now walking to our car in my parents' driveway, I knew Malik had been absolutely right. The test was working flawlessly, and my family had failed spectacularly in record time. They had not offered a single word of comfort. They had instantly excommunicated me the moment I became a perceived liability to their country club reputation. Malik opened the car door for me, his eyes shining with pride. "They took the bait perfectly," he murmured as he got into the driver's seat and started the engine. I buckled my seatbelt, feeling lighter than I had in 35 years. The heavy burden of seeking their approval had been completely lifted from my shoulders. As we pulled out of the gated neighborhood heading back toward the city, my phone vibrated in the dark console. I picked it up and saw a text message notification from Kendra. I opened it and read the words twice to make sure I was seeing them correctly. It read, "Drop off Grandma's vintage Rolex tomorrow. I am holding on to it before your creditors seize it from you. You do not deserve to lose family heirlooms because you are bad with money." I locked my phone screen, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. My own sister was already circling like a vulture, trying to strip me of the one sentimental item our grandmother had left me. I turned to Malik and read the message out loud. He laughed softly, shaking his head as he navigated onto the highway. "The real game is just beginning," he said. "Let us see how greedy they really get." Preston leaned back in his custom-upholstered dining chair and let out a scoff that seemed to vibrate the crystal wine glasses on the table. He swirled the amber liquid in his heavy tumbler, the ice clinking loudly in the sudden suffocating silence of the room. As a commercial real estate developer who married into our family, Preston had instantly absorbed my parents' elitist attitudes, wearing his arrogance like a suffocating designer cologne. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his bourbon before turning his pale, condescending gaze toward my husband. "Well," Malik Preston drawled, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth, "I suppose being a financial consultant does not actually translate to providing properly for your own household. It is one thing to let your wife play in the mud for a few years to humor her. It is an entirely different level of failure to let her drag you straight into the poorhouse. Real men invest in tangible assets like commercial real estate, not overpriced tomatoes and community garden fantasies. Now look where letting her wear the pants has gotten you. Both of you are flat broke and crawling to Vernon for a bailout." I felt a flash of hot anger rise in my chest at the blatant disrespect aimed at my husband. But Malik did not even blink. He simply offered Preston a polite, tight smile that I knew masked a brilliant, calculating mind. Malik sat with his posture perfectly straight, radiating a quiet, unshakable confidence that Preston could never buy. "We hit a rough patch," Preston Malik replied smoothly, his voice devoid of any defensive edge. "Markets fluctuate, supply chains break. We took a hit and we are dealing with the fallout." Kendra practically vibrated with excitement, thrilled to have the spotlight focused entirely on my supposed downfall. She leaned further across the table, her heavy gold bracelets rattling against the polished wood. "This is exactly like when you dropped out of the pre-med track at Howard University," she sneered, her eyes gleaming with malice. "You always start things you cannot finish, Zoya. Mom and Dad gave you every opportunity to be a doctor, to actually make something of yourself and elevate this family. But you decided you wanted to save the world with vegetables and compost. Look how well that turned out for you. You are 35 years old and starting over from absolutely nothing. You are a lifelong quitter, and now you are a bankrupt one too." The mention of my pre-med days was their favorite, most worn-out weapon. I had left the medical track over a decade ago because my passion was in agricultural technology and urban farming sustainability. I had built a highly profitable business that supplied organic produce to major restaurant groups across the entire Southeast. But to my family, any career that did not come with a prestigious traditional title and a pristine white coat was considered a shameful hobby. I looked down at my plate, letting my shoulders slump, playing the role of the broken, defeated sibling exactly as Malik and I had planned. Clarice sighed dramatically, placing her hands flat on either side of her plate, as if preparing to deliver a royal decree. "Well, this changes things considerably," she announced, her voice dripping with cold pragmatism. "As you know, the annual family holiday to the Bahamas is next month. Obviously, given your current financial disaster, you will not be joining us. We absolutely cannot have you bringing this depressing, desperate energy on our vacation. I need to relax, not worry about you asking us to pay for your overpriced dinners. The sheer, unadulterated irony of her statement nearly made me break character and burst into laughter. For the past 4 years, I had been the one quietly subsidizing those lavish family trips to keep the peace. I was the one who logged into the resort portal and upgraded their standard rooms to massive oceanfront suites. I was the one who covered the private catamaran charters and slipped my credit card to the concierge for those expensive dinners. Also, Vernon and Clarice could pretend to their country club friends that they were treating the whole family. They loved taking the credit while spending my hard-earned money, entirely oblivious to the fact that my little dirt project was funding their luxury lifestyle. I understand, Mom, I whispered, staring intently at my hands resting in my lap. We could not afford the flight right now anyway. Vernon stood up abruptly, throwing his linen napkin onto his half-eaten prime rib. I have lost my appetite entirely, he declared, his voice echoing through the grand room as he paced toward the hallway. Zoya, I want you and Malik out of my house right now. I work entirely too hard to maintain our standing in this community, and I will not sit here and listen to you complain about a pathetic situation you brought upon yourself. Go figure out your mess, and do not expect a single dime from my accounts. We are not sponsoring your failures. Leave before you ruin my digestion any further. We did not offer a single word of protest. Malik stood up immediately, moving with that same serene, untroubled grace. He placed a warm, solid hand on my shoulder, a silent reassurance that we were exactly where we needed to be. He pulled my chair out for me, treating me with a level of respect that Preston could not even fathom showing to Kendra. Let us go home, Zoya, Malik said quietly, guiding me toward the grand foyer. We turned our backs on the sneers, the judgments, and the cold stares of the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. We walked silently across the imported marble floors, my heels clicking softly in the vast space. Just as Malik reached out to open the heavy oak front doors, Vernon's voice boomed from the dining room, sharp and panicked. And Zoya, my father shouted, his tone devoid of an ounce of parental concern. Do not you dare put our home address on any of your bankruptcy filings. The heavy oak door clicked shut, severing Vernon's panicked voice and sealing us in the muggy Georgia night. The oppressive air of the mansion vanished instantly, replaced by the humid hum of crickets and distant city traffic. We walked down the sweeping brick driveway in complete silence until we reached our modest sedan parked behind Preston's gleaming sports car. The moment the car doors closed, enclosing us in the quiet sanctuary of the cabin, the suffocating tension shattered entirely. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for my entire life. Malik turned to me, the dim glow of the dashboard illuminating his face. The serene, defeated mask he had worn inside melted away, replaced by a sharp, wicked smile that reached all the way to his eyes. I could not help it. I broke into a matching grin, a deep, genuine laugh bubbling up from my chest and filling the small space. We had done it. We had played our parts to absolute perfection, and they had responded exactly as we predicted. My mind drifted back to the quiet sanctuary of our own kitchen just 48 hours ago. The morning sunlight had been streaming across our worn wooden table, illuminating the thick stack of legal documents Malik had placed in front of me. I remembered staring at the crisp white pages, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold my coffee mug. Right there on the signature line of the executive summary was a number that fundamentally altered the trajectory of our lives. $12 million. A massive national grocery conglomerate had been secretly evaluating my urban agricultural technology and organic supply chain for over a year. They saw what my family willfully ignored. They saw the scalable value of sustainable urban farming, the proprietary distribution software I had coded myself, and the massive community network I had built from the ground up. They wanted to acquire my entire operation to integrate into their nationwide infrastructure, and they were willing to pay $12 million to do it. The contract also included a highly paid executive consultant role for me, meaning I would retain creative control while securing generational wealth. I had sat at that kitchen table, tears of pure shock and relief streaming down my face, ready to dial my parents' number. I had wanted to scream my victory into the phone. I had wanted to force them to finally acknowledge that dropping out of the pre-med track was the best decision I ever made. I had wanted to demand their respect, to hear Vernon say he was proud of my business acumen, to hear Clarice brag about her self-made millionaire daughter to her country club friends. But Malik had reached out and gently covered my phone with his warm hand. His brilliant financial consultant mind was always working 3 steps ahead, analyzing human behavior just as sharply as he analyzed market trends. He looked at me with a profound protective seriousness and told me to wait. He reminded me of the decades of subtle cruelties, the constant belittling, the way they only valued me when I was paying for their luxury vacations. Zoya, he had said, his voice steady and resolute, they do not deserve to share in your victory until they prove they can support you in your defeat. Let us test them. Let us tell them the farm went under and the bank is foreclosing. Let us tell them we are completely bankrupt and see exactly who they are when they think your wallet is empty. It was a brilliant, painful trap. Malik knew that sudden wealth often brought out the worst in people, making it impossible to separate genuine love from financial opportunism. He wanted to surgically expose my family's true priorities before they had the chance to feign support, just to get their hands on my new fortune. If they offered us a spare bedroom or a warm meal or even just a word of sympathy, we would have celebrated the $12 million together as a family. But if they threw us out, we would know exactly where we stood, and we could walk away without an ounce of guilt. Now, sitting in the dark car outside their mansion, the results of that test were glaringly clear. They had not just failed, they had failed with spectacular cruelty. They had stripped me of my dignity, mocked my marriage, and banished me from their presence the very second I ceased to be a financial asset. The phantom weight of their expectations, the desperate lifelong need for their approval, evaporated into the night air. I felt completely, utterly free. Malik shifted the car into gear, pulling out of the driveway and leaving the sprawling estate behind us. We drove through the manicured neighborhood, the streetlights casting rhythmic shadows across the interior. "You were right," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion but devoid of any actual sorrow. "You were absolutely right about them, Malik. They only loved what I could provide. They never loved me." He reached across the center console and took my hand, his grip firm and anchoring. "You are a self-made powerhouse, Zoya," he told me, keeping his eyes on the road. "You built an empire from the dirt up. You do not need their validation anymore. You never really did. We are going to close this deal, secure our future, and watch them realize exactly what they threw away." I leaned back against the headrest, a profound sense of peace settling over my bones. The hardest part was over. The truth was out there, even if it was not the truth they thought it was. We had severed the toxic ties on our own terms. Suddenly, the silence of the drive was pierced by the sharp vibration of my phone resting in the cup holder. The screen lit up, illuminating the dark car with a harsh blue glow. I picked it up, squinting against the brightness. It was a text message from Kendra sent just minutes after we had been thrown out of the house. I opened the message, reading the words aloud into the quiet cabin. It said, "Drop off Grandma's vintage Rolex tomorrow morning. I am holding on to it before your creditors seize it to pay off your debts. You do not deserve to lose family heirlooms just because you are a complete failure with money." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the glass. My own sister was not offering a shoulder to cry on or a few dollars to help us buy groceries. She was already circling like a scavenger, eager to pick the meat off my bones and secure a luxury watch before the imaginary bank could take it. I locked the screen, tossing the phone back into the cup holder. Malik let out a low rumble of laughter, the sound rich with anticipation. "The real game is just beginning," he said, accelerating onto the highway. "Let us see exactly how greedy they are willing to get." The morning sun barely has a chance to burn the dew off the pavement outside our modest townhouse before the sleek silver hood of Vernon and Clarice's Mercedes glides into our narrow driveway. It is 7:30 on a Monday morning. Usually my parents do not venture to this side of the city, claiming the traffic ruins their entire day, but today they have a very specific, highly motivated agenda. I am standing at the kitchen window, holding a warm mug of black coffee, when I see my father march up the front walkway with my mother following closely at his heels. They are not carrying a casserole or offering the warm, concerned expressions of parents coming to comfort a child in the midst of a life-altering crisis. My father is clutching a thick manila folder tightly against his chest like a shield. I turn to Malik, who is sitting at the kitchen island, already dressed in his sharpest suit for work. He catches my eye and gives a slow single nod of confirmation. The vultures have arrived right on schedule. The heavy knock on our front door sounds more like a police raid than a family visit. I pull the door open and Vernon pushes past me without a single word of greeting or comfort. Clarice follows him inside, her eyes darting around our small living room with the familiar look of absolute disdain she reserves for anything that does not scream generational wealth. They do not bother to take off their coats. They do not ask how we slept or how we are coping with the financial devastation we announced less than 24 hours ago. Vernon walks straight to our modest glass coffee table and slaps the heavy folder down onto the surface. The sharp smack of the cardboard echoes in the quiet room. He flips the cover open, revealing a dense stack of legal documents peppered with bright yellow signature flags. "Sit down, Zoya," he commands, his voice carrying the exact same cold, authoritative tone he uses to reprimand insubordinate employees at his firm. I take a seat on the very edge of the sofa, playing the role of the terrified bankrupt daughter to absolute perfection. Vernon does not waste a single second on pleasantries or parental sympathy. He taps a manicured finger against the top document. "This is a formal transfer of deed," he states, plainly locking his eyes onto mine. "It legally relinquishes your 25% ownership of the inherited family land down in Savannah straight over to me and your mother." My heart does a slow, steady thud against my ribs. That 50-acre plot of coastal Savannah land has been in our family for 3 generations. It is pristine, untouched property that commercial developers have been salivating over for years. My grandfather explicitly left a quarter of it to me because I was the only one who actually loved the land itself, rather than just its appraised monetary value. Vernon leans forward, resting his hands heavily on his knees. He actually attempts to arrange his sharp features into a mask of paternal concern, but the pure, unchecked greed shining in his dark eyes gives his true motives away completely. "We are doing this to protect you, Zoya." He lies smoothly, his voice dropping into a persuasive corporate pitch. "When your creditors start tearing apart your life and seizing your assets to cover your massive debts, they will absolutely come after that Savannah property. The bank will take it all. We cannot allow your careless financial mistakes to strip this family of its historic legacy. You need to sign your shares over to us immediately before the bankruptcy courts freeze your accounts. It is for your own good and for the good of the family name." The sheer audacity of his demand is breathtaking. My father is not trying to protect me from anything. He is actively using my supposed financial ruin as a convenient excuse to execute a ruthless, calculated land grab. He wants complete control of the Savannah property so he can finally sell it to his commercial developer friends, and he knows this fake bankruptcy is his only chance to steal my shares for absolutely nothing. I look down at the dense legal papers, then up at Malik, who is standing quietly near the doorway, playing the part of the defeated, humiliated husband. I know that in reality my bank accounts are about to be flooded with $12 million from the corporate buyout. I know that I do not have a single creditor coming after me, but my parents do not know that. To them, I am bleeding out on the floor, and instead of tossing me a bandage, they are trying to steal my watch. I pick up the heavy brass pen my father placed next to the documents. I let my hand shake just a little to sell the performance. I look up at my mother, letting real tears of profound disappointment pool in my eyes. "Mom," I whisper, making my voice crack perfectly. "That land is the only thing Grandpa left me. If I sign this over to you, I will truly have nothing left to my name. Can we just wait a few days to see if the bank will negotiate with us?" Clarice drops the fragile facade of the concerned mother instantly. Her face hardens into a mask of pure aristocratic fury. She steps forward, snatching the heavy pen from my trembling fingers and slamming it back onto the glass table. "We are not negotiating with your failures, Zoya," she snaps, her voice turning sharp and lethal in the small room. "You will sign these papers right now, or you will face the absolute destruction of whatever pathetic social standing you have left in this city." If you drag this family name through a public bankruptcy court while holding on to that land, I will personally see to it that you are completely excommunicated from our elite church community. I will make sure every single board member, every charity chair, and every lifelong family friend knows exactly how reckless and selfish you truly are. She leans down until her perfectly powdered face is inches from mine, her eyes cold and entirely merciless. Your financial ruin is a disease, Zoya. It is a disgusting, highly contagious disease, and I will absolutely not allow you to spread your infection to Kendra or ruin your sister's bright future. Sign the papers and disappear, or I will make sure you have no family left to turn to. The heavy oak door clicked shut, severing Vernon's panicked voice and sealing us in the muggy Georgia night. The oppressive air of the mansion vanished instantly, replaced by the humid hum of crickets and distant city traffic. We walked down the sweeping brick driveway in complete silence until we reached our modest sedan, parked behind Preston's gleaming sports car. The moment the car doors closed, enclosing us in the quiet sanctuary of the cabin, the suffocating tension shattered entirely. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for my entire life. Malik turned to me, the dim glow of the dashboard illuminating his face. The serene, defeated mask he had worn inside melted away, replaced by a sharp, wicked smile that reached all the way to his eyes. I could not help it. I broke into a matching grin, a deep, genuine laugh bubbling up from my chest and filling the small space. We had done it. We had played our parts to absolute perfection, and they had responded exactly as we predicted. My mind drifted back to the quiet sanctuary of our own kitchen just 48 hours ago. The morning sunlight had been streaming across our worn wooden table, illuminating the thick stack of legal documents Malik had placed in front of me. I remembered staring at the crisp white pages, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold my coffee mug. Right there on the signature line of the executive summary was a number that fundamentally altered the trajectory of our lives: $12 million. A massive national grocery conglomerate had been secretly evaluating my urban agricultural technology and organic supply chain for over a year. They saw what my family willfully ignored. They saw the scalable value of sustainable urban farming, the proprietary distribution software I had coded myself, and the massive community network I had built from the ground up. They wanted to acquire my entire operation to integrate into their nationwide infrastructure, and they were willing to pay $12 million to do it. The contract also included a highly paid executive consultant role for me, meaning I would retain creative control while securing generational wealth. I had sat at that kitchen table, tears of pure shock and relief streaming down my face, ready to dial my parents' number. I had wanted to scream my victory into the phone. I had wanted to force them to finally acknowledge that dropping out of the pre-med track was the best decision I ever made. I had wanted to demand their respect, to hear Vernon say he was proud of my business acumen, to hear Clarice brag about her self-made millionaire daughter to her country club friends. But Malik had reached out and gently covered my phone with his warm hand. His brilliant financial consultant mind was always working 3 steps ahead, analyzing human behavior just as sharply as he analyzed market trends. He looked at me with a profound, protective seriousness and told me to wait. He reminded me of the decades of subtle cruelties, the constant belittling, the way they only valued me when I was paying for their luxury vacations. Zoya, he had said, his voice steady and resolute, they do not deserve to share in your victory until they prove they can support you in your defeat. Let us test them. Let us tell them the farm went under and the bank is foreclosing. Let us tell them we are completely bankrupt and see exactly who they are when they think your wallet is empty. It was a brilliant, painful trap. Malik knew that sudden wealth often brought out the worst in people, making it impossible to separate genuine love from financial opportunism. He wanted to surgically expose my family's true priorities before they had the chance to feign support, just to get their hands on my new fortune. If they offered us a spare bedroom or a warm meal, or even just a word of sympathy, we would have celebrated the $12 million together as a family. But if they threw us out, we would know exactly where we stood, and we could walk away without an ounce of guilt. Now, sitting in the dark car outside their mansion, the results of that test were glaringly clear. They had not just failed, they had failed with spectacular cruelty. They had stripped me of my dignity, mocked my marriage, and banished me from their presence the very second I ceased to be a financial asset. The phantom weight of their expectations, the desperate lifelong need for their approval evaporated into the night air. I felt completely, utterly free. Malik shifted the car into gear, pulling out of the driveway and leaving the sprawling estate behind us. We drove through the manicured neighborhood, the streetlights casting rhythmic shadows across the interior. "You were right," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion, but devoid of any actual sorrow. "You were absolutely right about them, Malik. They only loved what I could provide. They never loved me." He reached across the center console and took my hand, his grip firm and anchoring. "You are a self-made powerhouse, Zoya," he told me, keeping his eyes on the road. "You built an empire from the dirt up. You do not need their validation anymore. You never really did. We are going to close this deal, secure our future, and watch them realize exactly what they threw away." I leaned back against the headrest, a profound sense of peace settling over my bones. The hardest part was over. The truth was out there, even if it was not the truth they thought it was. We had severed the toxic ties on our own terms. Suddenly, the silence of the drive was pierced by the sharp vibration of my phone resting in the cup holder. The screen lit up, illuminating the dark car with a harsh blue glow. I picked it up, squinting against the brightness. It was a text message from Kendra sent just minutes after we had been thrown out of the house. I opened the message, reading the words aloud into the quiet cabin. It said, "Drop off Grandma's vintage Rolex tomorrow morning. I am holding on to it before your creditors seize it to pay off your debts. You do not deserve to lose family heirlooms just because you are a complete failure with money." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the glass. My own sister was not offering a shoulder to cry on or a few dollars to help us buy groceries. She was already circling like a scavenger, eager to pick the meat off my bones and secure a luxury watch before the imaginary bank could take it. I locked the screen, tossing the phone back into the cup holder. Malik let out a low rumble of laughter, the sound rich with anticipation. "The real game is just beginning," he said, accelerating onto the highway. "Let us see exactly how greedy they are willing to get." The heavy brass pen hovered a mere fraction of an inch above the thick parchment. I let my hand tremble violently, ensuring that my father could see the absolute terror radiating from my fingertips. Vernon leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the signature line with the intense predatory focus of a starving man looking at a feast. He was practically vibrating with anticipation, ready to snatch the document away the second the ink dried, cementing his theft of my Savannah property. Clarice stood over me, her arms crossed defensively over her immaculate designer suit, her face set in a mask of rigid disdain. The silence in our modest living room was suffocating, broken only by my deliberately shallow, panicked breaths. Just as the tip of the pen brushed the paper, a hand firmly wrapped around my wrist. I jumped, playing the startled victim perfectly. Malik stepped out from the shadow of the hallway archway where he had been quietly observing the ambush. His shoulders were slumped forward, his chest caved in, creating the flawless illusion of a completely broken man. He gently pried the brass pen from my shaking fingers and set it down on the glass coffee table well out of my reach. "We cannot do this right now." Vernon Malik said, his voice tight and hollow, stripped of all its usual warm resonance. "You cannot barge into our home less than a day after we lose everything and demand that Zoya sign away her last remaining asset. She is in shock. We need time to process this. We need time to review these documents with legal counsel." Vernon whipped his head around to glare at my husband, his face contorting into a sneer of pure, unadulterated contempt. "You do not get to make demands in this situation, Malik." My father spat the words, landing like physical blows. "You have absolutely no ground to stand on. You failed to protect my daughter. You allowed her to run her foolish little farming business straight into the ground, and you dragged her into bankruptcy. You are a financial consultant who cannot even keep his own house in order. Do not presume to tell me how to protect my family legacy from your staggering incompetence." Malik swallowed hard, looking down at the floor, acting as though Vernon's vicious insult had entirely dismantled his pride. I shifted my weight on the sofa, deciding it was the perfect moment to escalate the performance. I let a genuine-sounding sob tear from my throat, burying my face in my hands for a few seconds before looking up at my mother. I made myself look as small and desperate as humanly possible, entirely surrendering my dignity to the woman who had given birth to me. "Mom, please!" I begged, my voice cracking wetly. I reached out a trembling hand toward her. "Please forget the land transfer for just 1 second. We are drowning. The bank is going to initiate foreclosure proceedings on this townhouse by the end of the week. We have completely exhausted our savings trying to save the business. We have absolutely nothing left. If you could just loan us $5,000. Just 5,000. That is all we need to cover the immediate mortgage arrears and keep the lights on for 1 more month while we figure out our next steps. I swear to you on my life, I will pay you back every single cent. I will scrub floors if I have to. Just please do not let us lose our home." I watched my mother process the desperate plea. For a fraction of a second, I foolishly wondered if maternal instinct would override her obsession with social status. I wondered if seeing her oldest daughter begging for basic shelter would finally crack the ice around her heart. Instead, Clarice physically recoiled. She took a sharp step backward, her heel catching slightly on the edge of the area rug, as if my desperation was a highly contagious disease. She violently brushed the front of her tailored jacket, violently wiping away the invisible stain of my poverty. She looked down at me and let out a cold, sharp laugh that echoed off the living room walls. It was a sound entirely devoid of warmth or empathy, a sound that severed the final frayed thread connecting me to my family. "We do not sponsor dead weight." "Zoya," she stated, her tone perfectly level and absolutely lethal, "do you really expect me to hand over $5,000 to throw into the black hole of your failures? That is an absurd and offensive request. Kendra and Preston are breaking ground on their new infinity pool this week. They need that capital to finalize the imported Italian glass tile Kendra selected for the patio. Preston is actually building a proper life for your sister. He is a real provider. I will not divert a single dollar from my successful child to bail out my failing one. Actions have consequences, Zoya. You chose to play in the dirt instead of building a real career, and now you can lie in it." She turned her back on me, completely presenting me with the rigid line of her shoulders cementing her absolute betrayal. Vernon grabbed his suit jacket from the back of the armchair, refusing to even look at me. He pointed a thick, rigid finger at the stack of unsigned documents still resting on the coffee table. "I am leaving those right there," Vernon growled, his voice tight with lingering fury. "You have exactly 24 hours to sign every single page and deliver that folder to my receptionist. If those signed papers are not on my desk by tomorrow morning, I will make good on your mother's promise. I will personally see to it that you are entirely blacklisted from every social and professional circle in this city. You will not exist to us." Without waiting for a response, Vernon turned and followed his wife out the door. The heavy front door slammed shut, vibrating the picture frames on our living room walls. The lock clicked into place. I sat frozen on the edge of the sofa, listening to the muffled sound of their Mercedes engine roaring to life and backing out of our driveway. I waited until the sound of their tires faded completely down the street. The oppressive, suffocating weight of their presence slowly lifted from the room. I reached up and casually wiped the fake tears from my cheeks, letting out a long, slow exhale. I stood up, rolling my shoulders to release the physical tension of my performance. I turned to look at Malik. His slumped, defeated posture vanished in an instant. He stood up straight, adjusting the cuffs of his pristine suit, a bright, predatory smile breaking across his handsome face. He walked over to his briefcase resting on the dining chair and pulled out his sleek silver laptop, flipping the screen open. He tapped the keyboard rapidly, bringing up his secure email servers. "Right on schedule," Malik said, his voice rich and deep, ringing with absolute triumph. They showed their hand entirely. "Now let us see what Preston does next." The hum of the refrigerator felt exceptionally loud in the wake of my parents' departure. I walked over to the coffee maker, grabbing my favorite ceramic mug, and poured a fresh cup of dark roast. The rich, bitter steam rose into the air, and as I took my first sip, I realized something profound. The heavy, suffocating weight that had pressed down on my chest for 35 years was completely gone. The final invisible string tying me to Vernon and Clarice, to their impossible standards and conditional love, had snapped. I felt incredibly, wonderfully light. They had shown their true colors, and I no longer had to perform for an audience that actively rooted for my downfall. Malik leaned against the kitchen counter, watching me with a soft, proud expression. We did not need to exchange a single word to understand that a massive shift had just occurred in our lives. Before I could even formulate my next thought, the sharp trill of my cell phone shattered the quiet morning peace. I glanced at the screen. It was Tasha. Tasha was my fierce, no-nonsense corporate attorney, the legal shark who had masterfully negotiated every single clause of the $12 million buyout with the grocery conglomerate. She was a woman who billed by the minute and never called unless it was an absolute emergency or a finalized deal. I swiped to answer, putting the call on speakerphone and setting the device on the marble island so Malik could hear. "Good morning, counselor," I said, expecting an update on the escrow accounts. Instead of her usual brisk professional greeting, I heard a sound that made me freeze. Tasha was laughing. It was not a polite chuckle. She was laughing so hard she could barely catch her breath, a deep, resonant sound of pure disbelief. "Zoya," Tasha gasped, finally managing to pull herself together. "You are absolutely not going to believe the sheer, unadulterated audacity of this man. I have been practicing corporate law for 15 years, and I have never seen a vulture swoop in this fast." Malik crossed his arms, stepping closer to the phone. "Which vulture are we talking about, Tasha?" "Your darling brother-in-law." "Preston?" Tasha replied, her amusement quickly shifting into a razor-sharp edge. "I just got a highly confused phone call from an associate over at the city's commercial banking division. It turns out Preston spent his entire morning aggressively terrorizing their records department. He has been throwing his weight around, demanding to speak with the lead liquidation officer handling distressed agricultural assets." I stared at the phone, my jaw tightening. He was moving on my property. Less than 24 hours after mocking Malik at the dinner table for failing to provide, Preston was actively trying to profit off our fake misery. "He is trying to track down the foreclosed deed to your 50-acre urban farm," Tasha explained, her voice dripping with professional disgust. "He told the banking division that he has inside knowledge of an impending catastrophic default on the property. He wants to bypass the public auction process entirely. He is trying to position his own shell company to buy your life's work right out from under you for absolute pennies on the dollar. He actually submitted a formal letter of intent, offering a fraction of the land's raw value, claiming he is doing the city a favor by taking a toxic, bankrupt asset off their hands." The sheer mechanics of his betrayal were staggering. Preston did not just hate me. He saw my supposed ruin as a lucrative business opportunity. He knew the soil was rich, he knew the location was prime, and he wanted to bulldoze my greenhouses to build another soulless commercial strip mall. He wanted to steal my legacy while I was allegedly bleeding out on the floor. "He is moving fast because he thinks you are desperate," Malik noted, his voice low and calculating. "He thinks the bank is going to lock the gates by Friday, so he is trying to slide in through the back door." "Exactly," Tasha confirmed. The commercial banking division was completely baffled because, as we all know, your property is completely debt-free and currently in the final stages of a $12 million acquisition. There is no foreclosure, there are no creditors. But Preston was so arrogant, so blindly confident in his own superiority, that he did not even bother to pull a proper title search before making his move. He just assumed that because you said you were broke, he could swoop in and steal the crown jewel of your portfolio. I took another sip of my coffee, the hot liquid burning a pleasant trail down my throat. The audacity was sickening, but it was also the exact kind of sloppy, arrogant mistake I expected from someone like Preston. He had spent his entire marriage to my sister coasting on my father's connections, bullying small business owners and cutting corners. Now he thought he could do the same to me. "Here is the absolute best part," Tasha continued, the lethal calculating lawyer returning to the forefront. "Preston sent his letter of intent through his primary holding company. He used the same corporate entity that holds the collateral for his own outstanding commercial loans. He thinks he found a brilliant shadowy loophole to quietly steal your land and transfer the deed without Vernon or your sister ever knowing how cheap he got it. He is trying to cheat you, and he is trying to keep the massive profit margin entirely to himself. I looked at Malik. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking together perfectly. Preston's greed had blinded him to basic due diligence. He was so eager to capitalize on my downfall that he had willingly stepped right into a legal and financial minefield. Tasha paused, allowing the weight of the situation to settle in the quiet kitchen. When she spoke again, her voice was deadly serious, stripped of all amusement. He has officially submitted a fraudulent letter of intent based on false premises, and he has tied his primary assets to the claim. He thinks he found a loophole to steal your land. Should we let him? A heavy charged silence filled the room. The old Zoya, the one who craved family peace at any cost, would have called Kendra and warned her. The old Zoya would have told Preston to back off. But that woman died the moment my mother demanded I hand over my last $5,000 to fund an infinity pool. I looked at Malik, seeing my own ruthless determination mirrored in his dark eyes. I set my coffee mug down on the marble counter with a sharp, definitive clink. "Open the gate," I said. "Let him walk right in." Across town, inside the sterile, glass-walled confines of his ultra-modern home office, Preston paced like a starved hyena circling a fresh kill. He gripped his smartphone tightly against his ear, barking rapid-fire orders at a junior associate from his commercial real estate firm. His sprawling mahogany desk was entirely buried under municipal zoning maps, property tax records, and hastily scrawled financial calculations. Preston had not slept a single wink since Vernon banished Malik and me from the Sunday dinner table. The heavy scent of my supposed financial ruin was a potent drug to him, and he was completely intoxicated by the prospect of turning my misery into his masterpiece. Kendra sat sprawled across the white leather chaise lounge in the corner of the room, entirely unbothered by the frantic energy radiating from her husband. She swiped vigorously on her designer tablet, carelessly adding a $30,000 diamond tennis bracelet to her digital shopping cart. She barely looked up as Preston slammed his phone down onto the desk and let out a loud, triumphant bark of laughter that echoed off the cold walls. He marched over to the massive digital whiteboard mounted on the far wall, grabbing a red marker and tapping it aggressively against a glowing satellite map of Zoyas urban organics. He laid out his grand strategy for my absolute destruction with the breathless, manic excitement of a bank robber planning a flawless heist. "Your sister is a complete and utter fool," he told Kendra, his pale eyes gleaming with pure avarice as he stared at the map. "She built her entire little farming utopia on a 50-acre commercial plot that the city originally designated for high-density mixed-use retail. Because she is allegedly defaulting on her municipal agriculture grants and failing to pay her imaginary creditors, the city will automatically categorize the property as a severely distressed commercial asset by the end of the week." Preston turned around to face his wife, practically vibrating with ego, as he mapped out the obscure municipal loophole he believed he had brilliantly uncovered. In a standard foreclosure, he explained the property goes to a public county auction where a dozen different developers drive up the bidding price. But Preston knew a little-known county statute regarding distressed urban agriculture zoning. If a commercial developer presented a high-yield retail plan that promised immediate aggressive tax revenue for the city, they could file a direct acquisition claim with the holding bank before the public auction even began. "I can bypass the open market entirely," Preston boasted, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive tailored shirt. "I can literally buy her entire life work right out from under her, for absolute pennies on the dollar, completely shutting out any other buyers. The city will practically hand me the deed, just to get a non-performing agricultural asset off their ledgers." Kendra finally looked up from her tablet, her lips curling into a wicked, self-satisfied smile. Her eyes sparkled with the thrill of my impending devastation. "And what exactly are you going to do with all those stupid, ugly greenhouses?" she asked, twirling a strand of blonde hair around her finger. Preston scoffed, waving his hand dismissively at the glowing map of my farm. "I am going to bulldoze every single one of them. We will tear down those pathetic community outreach centers, rip up the expensive organic soil beds, and pave the entire 50 acres in cheap industrial-grade asphalt. I can throw up a prefabricated strip mall in less than 3 months. We will pack the lots with discount retailers, drive-through fast food chains, and a massive warehouse liquor store. It requires absolutely zero maintenance and guarantees a massive high-yield return. Your sister played in the dirt for a decade, and I am going to turn her pathetic sandbox into a commercial gold mine. Kendra let out a sharp melodic laugh, the sound dripping with pure sisterly malice. She immediately switched tabs on her device, navigating away from the jewelry boutique and opening the landing page for an exclusive Italian real estate broker. We are going to need a vacation home in Lake Como to celebrate this brilliant acquisition, she declared, her eyes scanning the multi-million-dollar listings with ruthless entitlement. Make sure you leave enough profit margin in your little strip mall budget for a private boat dock. I am absolutely not flying commercial to Italy, just because Zoya could not manage to keep her little vegetable stand afloat. Preston returned to his mahogany desk, his fingers flying rapidly across his keyboard. There was only one final crucial hurdle standing between him and his stolen fortune. To successfully execute the distressed asset bypass, he needed the holding bank to accept his formal letter of intent, immediately stamping it approved before the legal foreclosure notice was officially published to the general public. He needed a powerful inside connection at the commercial banking division. He needed someone willing to quietly fast-track his predatory paperwork in exchange for a highly lucrative future favor. He scoured the municipal banking directory, searching for the senior liquidation officer assigned to agricultural defaults in our district. A name popped up on the registry. It was an executive director with a stellar reputation for handling high-profile, discreet acquisitions. I found our golden ticket. Preston announced, a smug, deeply satisfied grin stretching across his face as he drafted a highly confidential, overly arrogant email. In the message, he detailed his aggressive plan to seize Zoya's Urban Organics, heavily implying he was willing to compensate the officer generously under the table for their immediate, unquestioning cooperation. He outlined how quickly he could mobilize his bulldozers, assuring the officer that the community gardens would be erased from the map before the neighborhood even knew what hit them. He hit send, with a dramatic heavy strike of the enter key, convinced he had just flawlessly executed the business deal of the century. He turned to Kendra, his chest puffed out with unearned pride. The email is out. We just need this bank executive to rubber stamp the bypass, and your sister's entire property is ours by Friday morning. Preston was completely, hopelessly oblivious. He had absolutely no idea that the email he just sent did not go to a corrupt, greedy banking official. It went straight into the heavily encrypted private inbox of Tasha, my ferocious corporate attorney. Tasha had established the dummy alias months ago to monitor any predatory inquiries or corporate espionage during our highly confidential $12 million acquisition. The trap was not just set. Preston had confidently walked right in and handed us the padlock. Malik sat across from Tasha in her sprawling, glass-walled office high above the Atlanta skyline. The room was a monument to corporate warfare, stripped of any warmth and dominated by a massive mahogany conference table and a bank of glowing monitors. Tasha was not just a lawyer, she was a master architect of financial ruin for anyone foolish enough to cross her clients. Today, her target was a man practically begging to be destroyed. Tasha let her fingers fly across her mechanical keyboard with lethal precision. In less than 40 minutes, she had completely fabricated a digital fortress. She birthed Apex Holdings, a dummy asset management firm, complete with a pristine, untraceable corporate website, offshore routing numbers, and a registered municipal vendor identification code. To any outside observer, Apex Holdings was a mid-level liquidation firm contracted by regional banks to quietly offload toxic, non-performing assets before they hit the highly publicized auction block. "We are live," Tasha announced, her eyes fixed on the center screen. Apex Holdings is now the official intermediary handling the distressed assets of Zoya's Urban Organics. Now let us cast our line and see how fast your brother-in-law bites. Tasha created a generic executive alias, Marcus Vance, Director of Distressed Asset Liquidation, and opened the aggressive email Preston had sent to the City Commercial Banking Division just hours prior. She drafted a response that was a masterpiece of corporate psychological manipulation. She did not play hard to get. Instead, she played the exact role Preston expected to encounter: a tired, overworked bank bureaucrat, desperate to clear a toxic agricultural default off the books before the end of the fiscal quarter. The email was perfectly calibrated. Marcus Vance informed Preston that the bank was highly motivated to bypass the lengthy public auction process to avoid negative press regarding failing green initiatives. Vance hinted heavily that a swift, discreet cash offer could secure the entire 50-acre parcel at a staggering 70% discount off the raw land value. Tasha hit send, leaned back in her ergonomic chair, and waited. She did not have to wait long. Across town, Preston was pacing his own office, practically vibrating with adrenaline. When the notification chimed on his desktop, he lunged for the mouse. He read the email from Marcus Vance and let out a triumphant shout. He turned to Kendra, who was casually reclining on the sofa, scrolling through a digital catalog of imported Italian marble for their new pool. "I have them," Preston declared, his chest puffed out with absolute arrogance. "The bank is bleeding. They are terrified of the bad press from foreclosing on your sister's pathetic community garden. They want a quiet backroom deal. They are practically begging me to take the land off their hands." Kendra barely looked up from her screen, her manicured finger tapping on a slab of Calicut gold marble that cost more than most people made in a year. "Just make sure you close it fast, Preston," she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. "I already told the contractor we are increasing the pool budget by another $50,000. Zoya's little dirt farm owes us that much for all the years she embarrassed this family with her mud-stained boots." Preston cracked his knuckles, a smug smile stretching across his face as he drafted his counteroffer. He was so utterly blinded by his own ego, so entirely consumed by the thrill of destroying my legacy, that his critical thinking skills completely evaporated. In the world of commercial real estate, purchasing a 50-acre agricultural property required rigorous, exhaustive due diligence. A competent developer would demand comprehensive soil toxicity tests, environmental impact surveys, structural assessments of the existing greenhouses, and an airtight title search. But Preston was not acting like a competent developer. He was acting like a greedy scavenger terrified of losing a stolen meal. He believed he already knew everything there was to know about the property because it belonged to his bankrupt sister-in-law. He assumed the greenhouses were worthless glass shacks. He assumed the soil was just dirt. He assumed the community centers were cheap, prefabricated husks. His grand vision was to bulldoze my entire life work, rip out the organic infrastructure, and pave over the 50 acres with cheap industrial-grade asphalt to construct a high-yield, low-maintenance strip mall. He saw dollar signs multiplying in his head, driven by the absolute certainty that he was the smartest man in any room. Back in the high-rise office, Tasha's monitor pinged with Preston's reply. She opened the document and let out a low whistle of pure disbelief. Malik stood up, walking over to stand behind her chair, his dark eyes scanning the text. "He is waiving the inspection contingencies," Malik said, his voice a quiet, dangerous rumble. "He is actually putting it in writing." Tasha shook her head, a predatory grin forming on her lips. "He is waiving everything, Malik. He is declining the environmental survey. He is declining the boundary assessment. He is even waiving the standard 30-day title insurance waiting period. He is demanding an expedited as-is transfer of the deed. He is so terrified that another developer might catch wind of the fire sale that he is legally binding his own holding company to a blind purchase." It was the ultimate commercial suicide. By waiving the contingencies, Preston was legally declaring that he accepted total liability for the property, regardless of whatever imaginary toxic waste or structural nightmares he might uncover after the ink dried. He was sprinting blindfolded into a minefield, absolutely convinced he was running toward a pot of gold. Tasha rapidly typed out the formal acceptance on behalf of Apex Holdings, confirming the expedited closing date and generating the official binding contract for the land transfer. She attached the heavy legal file, her finger hovering over the send button. But as she ran a routine background compliance check on the corporate financials Preston had attached to his letter of intent, her smile slowly faded, replaced by a sharp, calculating frown. She clicked through 3 different screens, isolating the balance sheets for Preston's primary holding company. She traced the routing numbers, analyzed the liquid asset columns, and cross-referenced his stated capital against his outstanding municipal loans. Malik noticed the shift in her demeanor immediately. "What is it?" he asked, leaning closer to the screen. Did he catch on? "No," Tasha replied, her eyes darting across the digital ledgers. "He is still completely clueless, but we have a massive problem on his end." Tasha picked up her cell phone and dialed my number. I answered on the first ring, pacing the length of my kitchen island, my nerves humming with anticipation. "Tasha," I said immediately. "Tell me he took the bait. He swallowed the bait." "The hook and the entire fishing rod, Zoya," Tasha replied, her voice crackling through the speaker. "He is asking for the contract right now. He wants to sign immediately." But there is a massive catch. I stopped pacing. "What catch?" Tasha let out a long, heavy exhale. "I just ran the compliance check on his corporate entity. Preston is projecting a millionaire lifestyle, but his business accounts are leveraged to the absolute brink. He does not have the liquid cash to close the deal." Before Tasha could elaborate on the massive financial deficit Preston was currently hiding, my phone screen lit up with a second incoming call. The caller ID flashed a name that made my blood run cold for a fraction of a second before my new hardened resolve completely took over. It was Kendra. I told Tasha to hold on, merged the calls, and put my sister on speakerphone. I needed my lawyer and my husband to hear exactly how the golden child of the family handled her sister's supposed financial ruin. Zoya, Kendra practically sang into the receiver. Her voice was painfully bright, carrying that specific syrupy tone she always used when she was preparing to deliver a verbal knife to the ribs. "I am just calling to check in on you. Mom told me you and Malik made a complete scene at Sunday dinner and stormed out. I wanted to make sure you were not completely falling apart." I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to sound small and wavering. "We are managing, Kendra. It is just really hard right now." "Well, I told you so," Kendra replied instantly, discarding the fake sympathy faster than a cheap pair of shoes. "I really did try to warn you years ago. You cannot build a life playing in the dirt. It is embarrassing. Mom and Dad always knew you would end up in the gutter, Zoya. You never had the mind for real business." I covered my mouth to muffle a genuine laugh, staring at the marble countertop. "We thought the urban farm was a solid investment," I whispered, injecting a pathetic, desperate tremor into my words. Kendra let out a sharp, condescending sigh. "That is your problem. You think with your heart instead of your head. You should have married someone like Preston. At least Preston knows how to handle real estate. He actually understands how the world works. He is securing our future, while your husband is dragging you straight into bankruptcy." Through the merged line, I could hear Tasha stifle a snort of pure amusement. Malik remained completely silent, but I could vividly picture the cold, calculating smirk resting on his handsome face in Tasha's high-rise office. "Preston is very smart," I offered weakly, feeding the exact ego Kendra desperately needed validated. "He is a visionary," Kendra boasted, the smugness radiating through the phone speaker. "In fact, he is working on a massive, highly confidential acquisition right now. A total game changer. We are already picking out fixtures for a vacation home in Italy. I have a personal shopper pulling vintage Prada for the trip. It is just a shame you will not be able to afford a plane ticket to come visit us. Maybe I can send you some postcards." I leaned over the kitchen island, pinching my own arm to force a convincing sound of distress. I let out a loud, ragged sob, followed by a series of wet, pathetic hiccups. "I have to go." "Kendra," I cried into the microphone, "I just cannot talk about this right now." "Suit yourself," she said coldly. "Try not to ruin anyone else's day with your negative energy." The line clicked dead. The Trojan horse takes shape. The second the call disconnected, my fake tears vanished entirely. I wiped my dry eyes and burst into genuine, unrestrained laughter. "She is already spending the imaginary profits," Tasha said, her voice crackling back over the speakerphone. Your sister is actively shopping for Italian real estate with money Preston does not even have yet. This is absolutely clinical narcissism. Let her shop, Malik interjected, his deep voice carrying a lethal calm. What is our move regarding Preston's cash deficit? If he cannot fund the escrow account, the entire trap falls apart. Do not underestimate the predictable nature of a desperate, greedy man, Tasha replied. The rapid clacking of her mechanical keyboard resumed, filling the brief silence. Preston is not going to let this deal slip through his fingers. He believes he is stealing a multi-million-dollar property for a fraction of its value. He is looking for alternative funding right now. Let me run a sweep on his recent credit inquiries. I poured myself another cup of coffee, listening to the digital hum of Tasha navigating the complex web of corporate finance. Minutes ticked by in heavy, delicious anticipation. Got him! Tasha announced, her tone ringing with absolute triumph. He is moving exactly as I predicted. He cannot go through traditional banking channels because a standard commercial loan requires a 30-day underwriting process. He needs the cash by Friday to satisfy the fake deadline I gave him, so he just applied for a massive mezzanine loan. I gripped my coffee mug tightly. A mezzanine loan. Is not that basically corporate loan sharking? Exactly, Malik answered before Tasha could. It is unregistered high-yield short-term debt. The interest rates are completely predatory. Lenders only approve them when the borrower puts up aggressive, highly liquid collateral. And what is he using for collateral? I asked, a sudden chill running down my spine. Tasha paused, and I could hear the sheer gravity of the situation settling over her office. He is leveraging his personal assets, Zoya. He just pledged the deed to his and Kendra's primary residence. He is putting up their custom-built mansion as the sole collateral for the mezzanine loan. If he defaults on this cash advance, the lenders will legally seize their home. I stared blankly at the kitchen wall. Preston was actually risking the roof over my sister's head to fund the destruction of my business. He was so blinded by the prospect of a cheap strip mall that he was willing to bet his entire life on a completely blind, unverified real estate transaction. Kendra was sitting on her white leather sofa, picking out Italian marble, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband had just gambled away their literal foundation. This is spectacular! Tasha breathed, the professional detachment fully giving way to awe. He is digging his own grave and paying retail price for the shovel. Will the mezzanine lenders approve the advance? Malik asked, keeping his focus entirely on the mechanics of the trap. Another burst of keyboard clicking echoed through the speaker. Tasha let out a sharp, frustrated sigh. There is a massive roadblock. The lenders just flagged the application. Preston's corporate accounts are too heavily leveraged. His debt-to-income ratio is a massive red flag for a short-term loan of this magnitude. So they denied him. I asked, my heart sinking. If Preston could not get the cash, he would be forced to back out and he would escape the trap completely unscathed. Not exactly, Tasha said, her voice dropping an octave. They sent him a conditional approval notice. He is asking for too much money on too short of a timeline. The lenders are demanding a guarantor. A what? I asked. A cosigner. Malik clarified, his tone sharpening into a razor edge. Precisely, Tasha confirmed. Preston's financial foundation is built on sand. The mezzanine lenders want a concrete guarantee. They sent him a legally binding stipulation. He needs a secondary guarantor with pristine credit and a verifiable, exceptionally high net worth to co-sign the loan documents. The silence in my kitchen was absolute. They gave him an ultimatum. Tasha continued, reading directly from the intercepted communications. He has exactly 24 hours to produce a wealthy guarantor to sign the liability waiver. If he does not secure a high net worth cosigner by tomorrow morning, they reject the loan and he loses the deal entirely. Sunday arrived with a brilliant, cloudless sky, casting a warm golden light over the sprawling grounds of the First Fellowship Cathedral. It was the day of the annual Black Excellence Luncheon, the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta's high society social calendar. This was where the city's elite gathered to network, display their wealth, and silently judge their peers over plates of catered salmon and roasted asparagus. For my family, this event was the ultimate stage. Vernon and Clarice spent months preparing for it, viewing the luncheon as a personal press conference to broadcast their flawless lineage to mayors, judges, and real estate moguls. Malik and I pulled into the crowded parking lot in our modest sedan, parking far away from the valet line, where Preston had undoubtedly abandoned his sports car. We had meticulously curated our appearance for the afternoon. There were no tailored designer suits for Malik today, and my expensive silk dresses remained hanging in my closet. Instead, I wore a simple, off-the-rack navy skirt that had seen better days, and my wrists were completely bare. I had even left my engagement ring locked in our safe at home, wearing only a plain gold band. We looked exactly like a couple drowning under the crushing weight of impending bankruptcy. The moment we pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped into the grand banquet hall, the shift in the atmosphere was immediate and palpable. The room was a vibrant sea of custom-tailored suits, elaborate church hats, and the heavy scent of expensive perfumes. We stood near the entrance scanning the crowd until my eyes landed on my parents. They were holding court near the center of the room, surrounded by a group of prominent church elders and local politicians. Vernon spotted us first. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second before his face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated ice. He did not wave. He did not step forward to greet his eldest daughter. Instead, he leaned down and whispered something sharply into my mother's ear. Clarice turned her head, her gaze sweeping over my unadorned outfit with a look of absolute disgust. In perfect, ruthless synchronization, my parents physically turned their backs on us. It was the ultimate social execution. In our community, a public snub from Vernon and Clarice was a signal to everyone else in the room. The message was clear. We were no longer under their protection. We were outcasts. Malik placed a warm, steady hand on the small of my back, guiding me toward a small, empty table near the kitchen doors. We sat down in silence, watching the performance unfold. My parents immediately shifted all of their energy to parading Kendra and Preston around the banquet hall like prized show ponies. Vernon's booming baritone voice carried easily across the room, ensuring that every person within a 50-foot radius could hear his boasts. He clapped Preston on the back so hard it made the younger man stumble slightly. "You all need to keep your eyes on my son-in-law here," Vernon declared, projecting his voice toward a group of wealthy commercial developers. Preston is finalizing a massive commercial real estate venture this week. He is completely revitalizing a blighted, distressed property in the municipal district. It takes a real visionary to step in and clean up other people's catastrophic failures. I took a slow sip of my ice water, hiding a sharp smile behind the rim of my glass. The dramatic irony was so thick, it was practically suffocating. Preston was standing in the middle of a church wearing a custom Italian suit, bragging to the entire congregation about rescuing a distressed asset. He was publicly celebrating the theft of my life's work, utterly convinced that his predatory bypass maneuver was a stroke of absolute genius. Kendra was practically vibrating with smug, self-satisfied energy. She stood beside her husband, casually flashing a brand-new limited-edition designer handbag that cost more than a reliable used car. She nodded eagerly as Preston detailed his grand plans to bulldoze the imaginary bankrupt farm and pave it over with high-yield retail space. He talked about maximizing profit margins and exploiting municipal loopholes, portraying himself as a ruthless, brilliant provider. He failed to mention to the church elders that he was funding this imaginary hostile takeover with a predatory mezzanine loan that leveraged his own home. He failed to mention that the bank executive he thought he was bribing was actually my corporate attorney. He was digging his own grave in front of 300 witnesses, and my parents were handing him the shovels. The community whispers started almost immediately. As Malik and I sat quietly in the corner, I could feel the heavy, judgmental stares of the people who used to beg me for organic supply contracts and charity donations. I watched the sideways glances from women in the country club circle who used to praise my entrepreneurial spirit. "Did you hear about her farm?" A woman at the next table whispered loudly to her companion, completely ignoring the fact that I was sitting 10 feet away. "Bankrupt. The city is taking the entire property. Such a shame." Vernon and Clarice must be absolutely devastated by the embarrassment. Malik reached under the table and squeezed my hand, a silent anchor in a sea of hypocrisy. I endured the humiliating stares and the poorly concealed gossip, playing the role of the broken, defeated outcast flawlessly. I kept my shoulders slumped and my eyes downcast, letting them feed on my supposed ruin. Let them talk. Let them dig their social graves right alongside Preston. As the luncheon wound down and people began moving toward the exits, I saw my mother break away from the crowd. She handed her empty champagne flute to a passing waiter and walked briskly toward the private coat check room in the back hallway to retrieve her cashmere wrap. I stood up, giving Malik a brief nod. It was time for the final test. I had to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that cutting these people out of my life was the right decision. I needed to give Clarice one absolute, undeniable final chance to be a mother. I followed her into the quiet, dimly lit hallway, slipping into the coat check room just as she was throwing her wrap over her shoulders. She stiffened the moment she saw me, her perfectly painted lips pressing into a hard, unforgiving line. She looked around nervously, checking to make sure none of her society friends had followed me in. "Mom," I said softly, stepping closer. "Do not you dare start crying in here, Zoya." She snapped, her voice a harsh, venomous whisper. "I will not have you causing a scene and ruining the flawless impression Preston just made on the Board of Deacons." I let out a shaky breath, forcing my voice to tremble. "I am not trying to cause a scene, Mom. I am just drowning. Preston is up there bragging about his new investments, and Malik and I do not even know how we are going to pay for our groceries next week. We are losing everything. I do not need a handout. I do not need Vernon to write a check. I just need my mother. I just need a little bit of support." I stared into her eyes, searching for a single ounce of empathy, a flicker of maternal instinct, anything that showed she saw me as a human being, and not just a failed asset on her social ledger. Clarice stepped back, physically recoiling, as if my poverty was a contagious disease that might stain her cashmere wrap. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my bare wrists and my cheap off-the-rack skirt. The absolute disdain in her eyes was chilling. "You are a cautionary tale, Zoya," she said, her voice dripping with lethal, icy precision. "I only have one successful daughter now." Clarice's final venomous words rang in my ears the entire drive home from the church gala. "I only have one successful daughter now." I repeated the phrase silently to myself, turning it over in my mind until any lingering trace of familial guilt completely evaporated. She had made her choice. They all had. Monday morning arrived with crisp, unyielding clarity. The time for playing the weeping, defeated outcast was officially over. It was time to execute the trap. At exactly 8 in the morning, Malik and I were sitting in an unmarked black SUV, parked halfway down the block from a gleaming glass-fronted high-rise in the financial district. Tasha had rented a sterile, ultra-modern executive conference room on the 40th floor for the day. Through a secure, encrypted audio feed connected to our vehicle, we had front-row seats to Preston's execution. Tasha had transformed herself for the role. I had seen her earlier that morning trading her usual vibrant, commanding wardrobe for a severe charcoal gray pantsuit. She wore wire-rimmed glasses and pulled her hair back into a tight, humorless chignon. To Preston, who had never bothered to learn the names of my corporate counsel, she was simply the anonymous, overworked trustee representing Apex Holdings. At 8:15, the heavy mahogany doors of the conference room swung open. Through the audio feed, I heard the unmistakable, arrogant click of Preston's expensive leather shoes echoing across the polished hardwood floor. He was practically humming with manic, unearned confidence, fresh off the high of being paraded around the church banquet hall as the family savior. "Mr. Vance, I presume." Tasha's voice filtered through the speakers, perfectly modulated to sound professional, slightly harried, and deeply impressed. "Thank you for accommodating this expedited timeline. The Municipal Banking Division is highly motivated to clear this distressed asset off the ledgers before the end of the quarter." "Please call me Preston," he replied, his voice dripping with condescension as he took a seat. "And I am always happy to help the city clean up a mess, especially one this toxic." I gripped Malik's hand in the SUV. Preston was actually gloating. He was sitting across from the woman orchestrating his financial ruin and using the opportunity to stroke his own massive ego. We rarely see independent commercial developers maneuver with such agility, Tasha said, feeding him the exact validation he craved. Usually, a transaction of this magnitude requires weeks of committee approvals and exhaustive legal reviews. But your letter of intent was incredibly decisive. I do not believe in bureaucratic red tape, Preston boasted loudly. When I see a high-yield opportunity, I strike. My firm operates on instinct and capital. The previous owner of this agricultural plot was a deeply misguided amateur who played in the dirt. I am a professional. I know how to extract maximum value from municipal failures. Tasha shuffled a thick stack of legal documents, the sound of heavy paper crisp over the encrypted feed. I appreciate your candor, Preston. Because we are bypassing the standard public auction and fast-tracking this direct acquisition, the contract is structured as an absolute ironclad, as is transfer. By signing today, you are legally committing $2.5 million to Apex Holdings to acquire the bundled distressed assets. Tasha paused her tone, taking on a masterfully crafted edge of artificial concern. The contract waives all environmental inspections, structural contingencies, and liability claims. You are purchasing a heavily distressed industrial plot and all associated debt entirely blind. If you need your legal counsel to review the liability waivers, we can absolutely pause the proceedings and reconvene later this week. It was a brilliant psychological maneuver. Tasha knew that suggesting he needed a lawyer or suggesting a delay would trigger his massive superiority complex. Preston let out a harsh, dismissive bark of laughter. I do not need a lawyer to hold my hand through a basic asset transfer. Preston scoffed. I know exactly what is sitting on that 50-acre plot. A few rotting greenhouses and some overpriced fertilizer. I am bulldozing the entire parcel by the end of the week. Hand me the pen. Through the audio feed, I heard the heavy, deliberate scratch of a fountain pen moving rapidly across thick paper. He was not reading the clauses. He was not skimming the liability addendums or paying attention to the specific legal descriptions of the bundled industrial plot. Driven entirely by his unchecked greed and the intoxicating thrill of stealing my legacy, Preston was blindly signing his name to a $2.5 million commercial contract. He was permanently binding his holding company to a highly distressed, toxic asset. He signed the non-refundable deposit waiver. He initialed the environmental liability transfer. He signed the absolute waiver of municipal recourse. There, Preston announced, the sound of him capping his expensive pen echoing sharply through the microphone. The deed is done. The property is mine. Let the city know they can finally balance their books. A brief, heavy silence stretched across the conference room. I held my breath in the SUV, waiting for the final strike. Thank you, Preston, Tasha said. Her voice was entirely stripped of the deferential tone she had been using moments before. It was now cold, crisp, and utterly surgical. I heard the unmistakable slide of a thick folder being pushed across the polished mahogany table. The asset transfer is legally binding. However, we cannot authorize the release of the municipal deed until the funding requirements are completely satisfied. I told your division I am securing a mezzanine loan to bypass the 30-day cash wait. Preston snapped, a sudden hint of irritation bleeding into his voice. The capital is guaranteed. The capital is highly leveraged against your primary residence, Tasha corrected smoothly. Your debt-to-income ratio triggered a mandatory security protocol by the lending institution. We just need the guarantor's signatures to release the funds, Preston. Do you have them? Less than 12 hours before Preston sat in that sterile, glass-walled conference room, he was standing in the exact center of my parents' sprawling, mahogany-paneled study. The room was a pristine monument to Vernon's towering ego, lined from floor to ceiling with leather-bound books he never actually read and framed photographs of his exclusive country club golf outings. Clarice sat perched perfectly on a velvet chaise lounge, delicately sipping a glass of imported Merlot, while Vernon occupied the massive throne-like leather chair behind his antique desk. Kendra was draped over the arm of her father's chair, playing the absolute picture of the devoted, highly successful daughter. Preston paced the length of the expensive Persian rug, delivering the sales pitch of his life. He was not asking them for a simple favor. He was offering them the financial opportunity of a decade. He painted a masterful, entirely fabricated picture of a municipal gold mine just waiting to be tapped. The commercial bank is practically giving the land away. Vernon, Preston insisted, his voice thick with manufactured urgency and theatrical disbelief. Zoya let the property completely default. It is a massive embarrassment, frankly, but her catastrophic failure is our absolute windfall. The city commercial division is completely terrified of the bad press. They offered me a direct immediate acquisition, $2.5 million for 50 acres of prime commercial zoning. Vernon leaned forward, the raw greed instantly cutting through his usual stoic, unbothered demeanor. 50 acres. You could fit a massive multi-level retail complex on a footprint that size. Exactly, Preston replied, slamming his fist onto his open palm for aggressive emphasis. A high-yield retail plaza. Discount chains, fast food drive-thrus, and a warehouse liquor store. It is a literal license to print money. But because of the highly accelerated timeline, the bank is demanding an immediate liquid cash transfer. I am securing a short-term mezzanine loan to bridge the gap and close the deal by Friday, but the underwriters are throwing up red tape. They are requesting a secondary guarantor. It is just a formality, really, to satisfy their corporate compliance algorithms. I need a co-signer with a pristine financial profile and substantial liquid assets to back the play. Preston stopped pacing and looked directly at my father, his expression practically glowing with false reverence and calculated respect. I could not think of a single person with a stronger, more respected financial portfolio in this entire city than you, Vernon. I want to keep this massive return on investment strictly within the family. Clarice set her wine glass down on a gold-plated coaster, her eyes sparkling with absolute unchecked avarice. It is brilliant, Vernon, she declared, her voice trembling with the thrill of impending wealth. It is exactly what we have always said. Preston is a visionary. He is taking the absolute mess your eldest daughter made and turning it into a family empire. We would be completely foolish not to back him on this. Kendra nodded vigorously, resting her chin affectionately on her father's shoulder. Plus, Daddy, you and Mom deserve a massive piece of the equity. You have worked so hard for us. Imagine the look on the country club board members' faces when you announce you are a senior partner in a massive new commercial plaza. You will be the kings of the district. That was the fatal strike. Preston and Kendra knew exactly how to play my parents. They expertly weaponized Vernon's massive ego and Clarice's desperate, unending need for social supremacy. Vernon did not even bother to ask to see a business plan, a soil report, or an environmental impact survey. Their blind, absolute favoritism for Kendra, combined with their toxic disdain for me, completely erased decades of supposed business acumen. They were so eager to profit from my ruin that they turned a blind eye to every massive red flag. Vernon opened his desk drawer and pulled out a leather-bound financial portfolio. He did not call his wealth advisor. He did not consult his legal team. He simply looked at Preston with overwhelming, entirely misplaced pride. What exactly are the underwriters demanding for the collateral backing? Vernon asked, pulling a heavy gold fountain pen from his breast pocket. Just standard security against the principal advance. Preston lied effortlessly, not missing a single beat. You will not lose a single dime. The absolute moment the deed transfers, the retail developers will start throwing cash at us. I will buy out the mezzanine loan in less than 60 days. I just need you to pledge your primary retirement accounts and the deed to this house. It is purely a paper formality to make the bank executives feel secure. Without a single moment of hesitation, Vernon signed the documents. Clarice eagerly followed suit, her elegant, looping signature sealing their absolute fate. They legally pledged their life savings and the sprawling McMansion they loved more than their own children. They co-signed a predatory, astronomically high-interest loan for a completely blind real estate transaction, utterly convinced they were securing their golden years while trampling over my grave. Back in the present inside the glass-walled conference room at Apex Holdings, Preston smiled. It was a cold, reptilian expression of pure triumph. He reached into his tailored leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope, sliding it smoothly across the polished mahogany table toward Tasha. "I anticipated the underwriters might get a little jittery," Preston said smoothly, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms with arrogant satisfaction. "I had the guarantor forms fully executed last night. You will find the financial profiles exceptionally robust. The collateral is a fully paid-off luxury estate in the northern suburbs, firmly backed by two heavily funded retirement portfolios. My in-laws are incredibly eager to close this deal." Tasha maintained her razor-sharp focus. She did not blink, and she certainly did not smile. She opened the heavy envelope and extracted the documents. She meticulously flipped through the pages, her sharp eyes scanning the liability clauses, the collateral descriptions, and the binding arbitration agreements. She verified the routing numbers and the property identification codes. Finally, she reached the very last page. There, at the bottom of the stark white paper, were the bold, unmistakable signatures of Vernon and Clarice. They had legally bound themselves to a multi-million-dollar debt bomb, tying their entire net worth to an industrial plot that Preston was buying completely blind. They had willingly handed over the keys to their kingdom just for the thrill of watching my supposed downfall. Tasha carefully aligned the papers, tapped them neatly against the mahogany table, and placed them securely into a heavy file folder. She looked up at Preston, her expression the absolute picture of a satisfied clinical corporate liquidator. "These signatures are perfectly in order," Tasha announced, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet, sterile room. "The collateral requirements are fully satisfied. The mezzanine funds will be released directly into the escrow account within the hour. The deed to the 50 acres is officially yours, Preston. Apex Holdings considers this transaction completely finalized." Preston stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a triumphant, arrogant flourish. "It has been an absolute pleasure doing business with you, Marcus. I look forward to bulldozing that pathetic little farm by Monday morning." He turned and walked out of the conference room, his head held high, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just signed his own financial death warrant and dragged my parents directly into the grave with him. The heavy doors clicked shut. Tasha waited exactly 10 seconds to ensure Preston was safely halfway down the corridor toward the elevators. Then she let out a long, deeply satisfied exhale, dropping the Marcus Vance persona entirely. She picked up her smartphone from the table, her manicured fingers flying rapidly across the glass screen. She opened a highly secure messaging app and pulled up a private group chat containing only Malik and me. She typed out the final, devastating confirmation. The message cut through the digital space with absolute finality. "The ink is dry. Vernon and Clarice are on the hook. Drop the bomb." The sharp, synchronized chime of multiple cell phones going off simultaneously is a sound that typically signifies an emergency. In our quiet living room, it sounded like pure, unadulterated victory. Malik and I sat perfectly still on our sofa, bathed in the cool blue light of his laptop screen. The press release had just hit the wire. Within seconds, the syndication algorithms blasted the news across every major financial platform, social media network, and local Atlanta news outlet. The carefully constructed, completely fabricated narrative of my pathetic downfall had just been violently obliterated by a $12 million reality check. My phone resting on the glass coffee table began to vibrate intensely. It danced across the surface, lighting up with a rapid-fire barrage of notifications. The first wave came from my former colleagues and loyal clients, flooding my lock screen with messages of shock, overwhelming congratulations, and absolute awe. The second wave, entirely predictable in its timing, came from the extended family group chats. I leaned forward and picked up the device, unlocking it to monitor the fallout. Chloe, our loyal operative still stationed under the banquet table at Kendra's lavish New Beginnings dinner party, was sending live updates at lightning speed. Her texts were a chaotic, glorious stream of digital panic. "Chloe, OMG, OMG. Zoya, you are a literal legend. Chloe, Uncle Vernon's phone just went off, and Aunt Clarice's, and Preston's. Chloe." The entire table is checking their alerts. Chloe Preston just dropped his wine glass. It literally shattered everywhere. He is turning purple. Chloe Aunt Clarice is staring at her screen like she just saw a ghost. I read the messages aloud to Malik, my voice completely steady, entirely devoid of the anxiety that had plagued my interactions with my family for 3 decades. Malik let out a deep, rumbling laugh, shaking his head as he watched the live analytics on his laptop dashboard track the skyrocketing engagement of the press release. They are reading it. Malik said, his eyes scanning the data. They are reading every single word. They are reading about your $12 million acquisition, and they are reading the footnote about Preston's toxic industrial wasteland. My phone buzzed again, this time with an incoming call. The caller ID flashed a name I had spent my entire life trying to please, a name that used to bring a knot of anxiety to my throat. It was Vernon. I let it ring. The sound echoed through the living room, sharp and demanding. I watched the screen until the call finally went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, Clarice called. I let that ring out too. Then came Kendra. Then Preston. The calls rolled in one after another in a frantic, desperate cycle of panic. They were scrambling desperately, trying to construct a new reality where they had not just publicly celebrated their own massive financial suicide. Chloe sent another rapid burst of texts. Chloe, total chaos. Preston is screaming at someone on the phone in the hallway. I think he is trying to call his holding company. Chloe, Uncle Vernon is yelling at Kendra. He keeps asking her what Preston actually bought. Chloe, Kendra is crying. She keeps saying the bank lied to them. Chloe, Aunt Clarice just told the caterers to stop serving. I think she realized they cannot afford this party anymore. I set the phone down, leaning back into the plush cushions of the sofa. For years, I had believed that standing up to my family would require a massive, dramatic confrontation. I thought I would have to scream, cry, and beg them to understand the damage they had done. But sitting in the quiet safety of my own home alongside a husband who genuinely respected me, I realized true power did not require shouting. True power was simply removing myself from their toxic orbit and letting their own blinding arrogance destroy them. They had built their entire identities on the foundation of looking down on me. Vernon needed me to be a failure so he could feel like a brilliant patriarch. Clarice needed my supposed lack of refinement to highlight her own social grace. Kendra needed my financial struggles to justify her relentless materialism. Preston needed my ruin to fuel his predatory ego. By simply succeeding on my own terms, by quietly securing a $12 million acquisition, while they spent months actively plotting to steal what little they thought I had completely dismantled their reality. Malik closed his laptop with a soft, definitive click. He turned to me, his expression radiating a profound, quiet pride. It is over, Zoya. The trap is sprung. The holding company is legally untouchable. Tasha made sure of it. Preston owns a worthless industrial hazard, and your parents legally co-signed the debt. They cannot back out. They cannot cancel the mezzanine loan. They handed over the deed to their house, and the lenders are going to collect. I looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline, the city lights glittering against the dark night sky. The urban farm I had built from the ground up, the soil I had tended for a decade, the community I had nurtured was now backed by a national conglomerate. My legacy was secure. The people who had desperately tried to bury me were about to find out that I was a seed. My phone vibrated one final time. It was a single text message from Vernon, stripped of his usual booming authority, stripped of his condescension and reduced to a pathetic, terrified plea. Vernon, Zoya. Please, pick up the phone. We need to talk about this holding company. Preston made a mistake. We could lose the house. Please, you have to help us. I stared at the message for a long moment. I did not feel a shred of pity for the man who had turned his back on me at the church gala. I did not feel sorry for the woman who called me a cautionary tale. And I certainly did not care about the sister who tried to finance her Italian vacation with my tears. I picked up the phone, blocked his number, and set the device face down on the table. I turned to Malik, a genuine, completely unburdened smile finally breaking across my face. Are you hungry? I asked, feeling lighter than I had in 30 years. Because I think we should go out and celebrate. While Malik and I stepped out into the warm, fragrant Atlanta night to celebrate our victory, an entirely different kind of evening was reaching its catastrophic climax across town. At that exact moment, nestled in the affluent northern suburbs, Kendra was holding court at her extravagant New Beginnings dinner party. Kendra had spared absolutely no expense funding the catered affair, with credit cards she assumed would soon be paid off by Preston's massive real estate flip. Crystal flutes brimmed with imported French champagne. Waiters in crisp black vests circulated with trays of truffle-infused Wagyu sliders and beluga caviar. The guest list was a carefully curated selection of Vernon and Clarice's most influential country club friends, local politicians, and high society gossips. The entire event was designed as a victory lap to celebrate Preston's sheer brilliance. Vernon stood at the head of the long candlelit dining table, tapping his knife against his crystal glass to demand silence. "To my son-in-law Preston," Vernon boomed, raising his glass high. "A man of true vision. While others falter and fail, Preston steps in, secures the capital, and builds the future. To the new retail empire, to family legacy." Just as the crystal glasses clinked together in a chorus of smug satisfaction, a sharp, synchronized sequence of notifications sliced through the elegant dining room. It was not just one phone. It was every single device connected to a financial news alert, local Atlanta business wire, or agricultural tech feed. A prominent commercial real estate developer sitting to Vernon's right pulled out his smartphone, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "Vernon," the man said, his voice cutting through the remaining chatter. "Is this a joke? Did you know about this?" Vernon lowered his glass, irritation flashing across his face. "Know about what Richard?" Richard cleared his throat and read the headline directly from the glowing screen. "National grocery conglomerate acquires Zoya's Urban Organics in historic $12 million deal. The acquisition includes all agricultural assets, intellectual property, and proprietary soil technology. Zoya has been retained as a highly paid executive consultant to oversee the national rollout." Silence slammed into the room. It was a thick, suffocating, absolute silence. Vernon physically choked on his expensive wine, coughing violently, as Clarice dropped her silver fork. It hit her porcelain plate with a sharp, jarring crack. Kendra practically lunged across the table to snatch the phone from Richard's hand, her eyes scanning the text with manic desperation. Preston stood frozen at the opposite end of the table. His mind aggressively rejected the reality of the words floating in the air. If Zoya had just sold her farm for $12 million to a national conglomerate, what in the absolute hell had he just bought for $2.5 million? Before Preston could formulate a single coherent thought, his own phone began to ring. The caller ID flashed the name of his primary mezzanine lender. Preston stumbled backward, bumping into a waiter as he scrambled out of the dining room and retreated into the quiet marble-tiled hallway. "Harrison," Preston hissed into the receiver, his voice tight with rising panic. "Tell me you have not released the funds. Tell me you saw the news." "The funds were released 4 hours ago, you absolute idiot!" Harrison screamed through the speaker, the sound so loud, Preston had to pull the phone away from his ear. "I just saw the financial wire. Zoya sold her farm. She sold her farm to a conglomerate. So what exactly is backing my $2.5 million? What did you buy, Preston?" Preston was hyperventilating his custom Italian suit, suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. He hung up on Harrison and immediately dialed Tasha's number. He prayed to a God he rarely acknowledged that there had been a clerical error, a simple paperwork mix-up that could be reversed. Tasha answered on the first ring. Her voice was no longer the deferential, harried corporate trustee he had spoken to that morning. It was ice-cold, sharp as shattered glass. "Apex Holdings, Tasha speaking." "Tasha," Preston gasped, pacing the hallway frantically. "The Zoya farm. There has been a massive mistake. The news is reporting she sold it. You told me the agricultural plot was bundled into the holding company." "I told you a distressed agricultural and industrial plot was bundled into the holding company, Preston," Tasha corrected smoothly, her legal precision lethal. "I explicitly advised you that you were purchasing the asset entirely blind. You specifically waived all environmental inspections, structural contingencies, and liability claims. You insisted you did not need a lawyer. What did I buy? Preston demanded, his voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek. What is on that 50-acre deed? You purchased Parcel 409. Tasha informed him, her tone completely devoid of emotion. It is a condemned, highly toxic municipal swamp lot that Apex Holdings acquired in a bankruptcy liquidation 3 years ago. It is completely undevelopable due to severe soil contamination and strict federal wetland protections. It is worth absolutely nothing. In fact, it carries roughly $400,000 in outstanding municipal cleanup fines, which you explicitly assumed liability for when you signed the absolute waiver of recourse this morning. Preston stopped pacing. The blood drained from his face so rapidly, he swayed on his feet, bracing his hand against the cool marble wall to keep from collapsing. He had bypassed the inspections. He had rushed the closing to secure the deal before anyone else could. He had ignored every single red flag because he was so blinded by his desperate need to steal my success. You set me up. Preston breathed, the horrific realization finally crashing down on him. Zoya set me up. You set yourself up, Preston, Tasha replied coldly. You wanted to profit off a distressed asset without doing your due diligence. You signed the contract. The deed is yours. Good luck with the swamp. Tasha hung up. The dial tone echoed in Preston's ear, a flat, monotonous hum that signaled the absolute end of his life as he knew it. Preston slowly lowered the phone. His hands were trembling violently. He turned and walked back toward the dining room. The scene inside was pure chaos. Guests were whispering furiously, their eyes darting between Vernon, who was clutching his chest, and Clarice, who was aggressively denying the news to anyone who would listen. Kendra was sobbing, her extravagant makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. Preston stood in the arched doorway of the dining room. The room gradually fell silent as they registered his ghostly, hollow expression. Vernon looked at his son-in-law, his eyes wide with a sudden, paralyzing terror. Preston, Vernon demanded, his voice shaking. Tell me the bank halted the transfer. Tell me our collateral is safe. Preston looked at Vernon. He looked at Clarice, who was gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard her knuckles were stark white. He looked at his wife Kendra, who was staring at him with desperate, pleading eyes. He opened his mouth, delivering the words that would permanently shatter their world into a million unrecoverable pieces. The money is gone, Preston said, his voice entirely dead. I bought a toxic swamp, and they have the house. 2 days later, the oppressive heat of the Atlanta evening did absolutely nothing to deter the city's elite from descending upon the grand ballroom of the Biltmore Hotel. It was the night of the Black Excellence Gala, an event that usually served as Vernon and Clarice's personal coronation. For decades, they had used this specific evening to cement their status at the absolute apex of the city's social hierarchy. Tonight, however, the atmosphere surrounding my family was remarkably different. From our vantage point in the tinted luxury sedan idling near the valet stand, Malik and I watched the spectacle unfold through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the hotel lobby. Vernon, Clarice, Kendra, and Preston had arrived early, but they were not holding court. They were drowning. Even from a distance, the sheer panic radiating from their tight cluster was palpable. Vernon was sweating profusely, continuously dabbing his forehead with a monogrammed silk handkerchief. His bespoke tuxedo looked suddenly too large for him, his shoulders slumped under the crushing multi-million-dollar weight of the toxic debt he had co-signed. Clarice stood rigidly beside him, her perfectly painted smile brittle and terrified, her eyes darting frantically around the room, as if waiting for the bank to send repossessors straight to the gala. Preston was pacing a tight circle around them, his phone practically glued to his ear. He looked manic. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was desperately trying to network, attempting to find a miracle investor, a shadow buyer, or a predatory hedge fund willing to bail him out of the Apex Holdings contract. But commercial real estate is a remarkably small community in Atlanta. The Whisper Network had already done its job. Everyone in that lobby knew Preston had blindly purchased a highly contaminated, undevelopable swamp lot. They knew he was bleeding cash, and they were actively avoiding him like a walking contagion. Kendra looked as though she was holding back a violent, hysterical breakdown. She kept snapping at passing waiters, her usual smug superiority replaced by a raw, naked terror. She was watching the life of luxury she felt entitled to evaporate right before her eyes. Malik reached over and gently adjusted the lapel of my custom-tailored emerald green silk gown. "You ready to show them what actual excellence looks like?" he asked, his voice a low, steady anchor in the dark car. "I am ready to end this," I replied, my voice cool and entirely devoid of the anxiety that used to paralyze me around my family. We stepped out of the sedan, the flash of the society photographer's cameras immediately capturing our arrival. We did not look like the bankrupt, defeated outcasts Vernon and Clarice had proudly discarded at the church luncheon. We were the absolute embodiment of immaculate, understated wealth. Malik wore a flawless midnight blue Tom Ford tuxedo that fit him with lethal precision. I wore no loud designer logos, no ostentatious displays of desperate new money. My jewelry was minimalist, save for one highly specific, incredibly deliberate piece, resting securely on my left wrist, catching the light of the flashbulbs with a heavy golden gleam, was the vintage solid gold Rolex that Kendra had tried to extort from me months ago. The heavy brass and glass double doors swung open and the valet announced our entrance. We stepped onto the plush red carpet of the grand lobby. The shift in the room's energy was instantaneous. The low hum of networking and society gossip faltered, rippling into a sudden, highly charged silence. Heads turned, glasses paused halfway to mouths. Vernon spotted us first. The monogrammed handkerchief dropped from his trembling hand, fluttering silently to the marble floor. He stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking, his jaw completely slack. Clarice physically recoiled, taking a stumbling step backward, as her gaze swept over my immaculate gown, then Malik's undeniable aura of power, and finally settling directly on the golden Rolex shining on my wrist. Kendra let out a sharp, audible gasp. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes darting frantically from the watch to my face. Preston simply stopped pacing. The phone slipped slowly from his ear, his face draining of whatever color it had left. They had expected me to crawl in wearing rags, begging for a handout. Instead, I had arrived looking like the woman who owned the building. We glided across the marble floor, moving directly toward the entrance of the main ballroom. Our path brought us within 2 feet of my family's frozen, terrified cluster. As we passed, Clarice reached a trembling hand out toward me, her voice a desperate, raspy whisper. "Zoya." I did not break my stride. I did not turn my head. I did not even grant her the dignity of a glance. I walked right past her, leaving her hand hovering in the empty air. It was the exact flawless execution of the social snub she had subjected me to just days prior, completely reversed and infinitely more devastating. We were escorted past the general admission tables, walking past the mid-tier donors and local politicians directly to the front of the room. The event coordinators pulled out our chairs at Table 1, the undisputed center of power for the evening, seated directly beside the mayor and the city's top philanthropists. Table 4, where my family was assigned to sit, might as well have been in a different time zone. Dinner was served, but the tension radiating from the back of the room was thick enough to choke on. Every time I took a sip of my water, every time I smiled at a joke the mayor made, I could feel the burning, paralyzed stares of Vernon, Clarice, Kendra, and Preston. They were not eating. They were not speaking. They were simply sitting in their chairs, trapped in a psychological torture chamber of their own making, watching the daughter they had violently discarded hold court with the absolute elite of the city. As the dessert plates were cleared, the lights in the grand ballroom dimmed, and a spotlight hit the main stage. The mayor, acting as the keynote speaker for the evening, stepped up to the acrylic podium. He adjusted the microphone, a wide, enthusiastic smile spreading across his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor began, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Tonight we are here to celebrate the innovators, the visionaries, and the relentless spirits who push our great city forward. Tonight I have the distinct honor of announcing a special commendation for one of our own, a true pioneer in urban agriculture and environmental technology." A low murmur of anticipation rippled through the crowd. I felt Malik's hand slide over mine under the table, his thumb tracing a slow, reassuring circle against my palm. Just this week, The mayor continued, his voice rising with theatrical excitement. This brilliant entrepreneur closed a historic landscape-shifting deal. A national grocery conglomerate has acquired her proprietary soil technology and urban farming infrastructure in a massive $12 million acquisition. The ballroom erupted in a collective stunned gasp. $12 million. The number hung in the air, sparkling and absolute. Not only has she secured this historic buyout, the mayor added, speaking over the rising applause, but she has also been retained as a highly paid executive consultant to oversee the national rollout of her sustainable farming initiative. She is the city's newest philanthropic powerhouse, and she is just getting started. Please join me in congratulating the brilliant, the unstoppable Zoya Vance. The room exploded into a deafening standing ovation. 300 of the city's wealthiest, most influential residents rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. I stood slowly smoothing the skirt of my emerald gown and accepted Malik's proud, beaming smile. Before I walked toward the steps of the stage, I turned my head and looked directly down the center aisle of the ballroom, locking my eyes entirely on table 4. Vernon was gripping the edge of the tablecloth so hard his knuckles were bone white, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly as he struggled to draw breath. Clarice had a hand pressed firmly against her chest, her face a mask of absolute, unadulterated horror. Kendra was openly weeping now, her tears ruining her expensive silk dress. And Preston. Preston looked like a man who had just been handed his own death certificate. I held their paralyzed, terrified gaze for 3 long, deliberate seconds, ensuring they felt the full, crushing weight of their catastrophic failure. Then I turned my back on them and walked up the stairs to claim my spotlight. After delivering a brief, gracious speech, thanking my community and my husband for their unwavering support, I exited the stage right, slipping through a set of heavy velvet curtains into the private marble-lined VIP hallway that led to the green rooms. The corridor was quiet, blissfully insulated from the roaring applause of the main ballroom. I needed a moment to catch my breath to let the reality of the victory settle into my bones. I did not get the chance. Heavy, frantic footsteps echoed sharply against the marble floor. I turned around to find Vernon, Clarice, Kendra, and Preston practically sprinting down the hallway toward me. They had abandoned the gala entirely, desperate to corner me away from the prying eyes of high society. They ambushed me, forming a tight, frantic semicircle. Vernon's face was a dangerous shade of purple. The veins in his neck were visibly pulsing against his tight collar. "Why did you lie to us?" he demanded, his voice a harsh, trembling hiss, completely stripped of his usual patriarchal dominance. "You sat in that church and let us believe you were completely bankrupt. You told your mother you could not afford groceries." I crossed my arms slowly, ensuring the vintage Rolex caught the dim lighting of the hallway. "I did not lie, Vernon," I replied, my voice cool and perfectly level. "I said the farm was gone. I said we were losing the property. I just never specifically mentioned it was because I sold it to a national conglomerate for $12 million. You assumed I was bankrupt because you desperately wanted it to be true. You wanted to see me fail." Clarice stepped forward, her hands shaking violently. "Zoya, please," she begged, her voice high and reedy, attempting to play the role of a desperate, loving mother. "You have to understand. We were just trying to protect the family assets. We thought you were a liability." "Malik wanted to run a test," I said, completely ignoring her pathetic attempt at maternal affection. "My husband wanted to see if my family actually loved me, or if they only loved my wallet and the prestige I could bring them. You answered that question loud and clear. The second you thought I had nothing to offer you, you threw me to the wolves and turned your backs on me." Preston pushed his way to the front of the group. He was sweating so profusely his hair was plastered to his forehead. He looked completely shattered, a pathetic, broken shell of the arrogant man who had bragged about bulldozing my life. Zoya, Preston pleaded, his voice cracking into a high, desperate whine. "Please! You have to call Apex Holdings. You have to call Tasha. Tell her to cancel the contract. I know you orchestrated this. I know she is your corporate attorney. You cannot do this to us. The mezzanine lenders are going to seize the house. We are going to lose absolutely everything." He was practically hyperventilating, his hands clasped together in a pathetic begging gesture. I looked at him feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt, no remorse. I looked at Kendra, who was hiding behind her father, sobbing uncontrollably. I looked at Vernon, whose empire was crumbling into dust. And finally, I looked directly into Clarice's terrified, tear-filled eyes. I leaned forward slightly, dropping my voice to a sharp, lethal whisper. I am a businesswoman, Preston, and as my mother always said, we do not sponsor dead weight. I turned on my heel, the emerald silk of my gown sweeping across the polished marble floor, and walked back toward the ballroom, where my husband, my future, and my $12 million reality were waiting for me. I did not look back. The financial trap Preston had so eagerly constructed for me snapped entirely shut around his own neck with lethal precision. Because he had bypassed every standard inspection and rushed the closing to steal what he assumed were my lucrative assets, his massive commercial mezzanine loan defaulted almost instantly. The moment the lenders realized their $2.5 million collateral was a highly toxic, legally condemned municipal swamp, they moved with ruthless, terrifying speed. The bank did not offer extensions. They did not negotiate. They initiated immediate foreclosure proceedings on Preston and Kendra's lavish over-mortgaged custom home. Within 48 hours, the eviction notices were nailed to their imported mahogany front doors. But the crushing weight of cosmic karma did not stop with my sister and her predatory husband. Vernon and Clarice, blinded by their desperate need to elevate their golden child, had co-signed that reckless commercial loan. By securing Preston's debt with their own estate, they had legally bound themselves to his catastrophic failure. When Preston's assets failed to cover the massive deficit, the bank came directly for my parents. They were aggressively forced into total liquidation. The sprawling 6-bedroom McMansion they had used to lord over the Atlanta suburbs for 3 decades was seized. The luxury cars were repossessed right out of the driveway. Their pristine platinum-tier country club memberships were instantly revoked due to unpaid dues and public bankruptcy filings. The social fallout was absolute, swift, and deeply humiliating. In the affluent circles of their elite church community, rumors spread like wildfire. The same people who had happily attended Kendra's lavish dinner party now whispered loudly in the pews about Vernon's financial ruin. They were excommunicated from the very high society they had worshipped. The prestige they had valued over their own flesh and blood evaporated into thin air. I sat in the climate-controlled security room of my new, heavily gated compound, watching a live drone feed Malik had tapped into. The screen displayed a fleet of discount moving trucks, parked haphazardly on the manicured lawn of my parents' estate. Movers were hauling away antique furniture and crystal chandeliers to be sold at auction. I watched the empire they had built on arrogance crumble to dust, and I felt absolutely no guilt. My chest was entirely hollow of sympathy. Suddenly, the sharp chime of my estate intercom buzzed, cutting through the quiet room and signaling a visitor at my private perimeter. I checked the primary security monitor and saw a lone, disheveled figure standing outside my heavy wrought iron gates. It was Clarice. I bypassed the remote intercom release, smoothed the fabric of my silk trousers, and walked down the long, winding, newly paved driveway to meet her face to face. The humid Atlanta air was heavy, but the breeze carrying the scent of fresh pine from my private acreage felt incredibly sweet. When I reached the towering iron gates, the sight before me was jarring. The woman who had always demanded absolute perfection, who had meticulously coordinated her outfits to match her profound condescension, was utterly broken. Her designer clothes were visibly wrinkled. Her hair, usually sprayed into an immaculate helmet, was windblown and unkempt. As I approached, she gripped the thick iron bars of the gate. She was crying. These were not the calculated theatrical tears she used to manipulate my father or command attention at church luncheons. These were real, desperate, hyperventilating tears born of genuine terror. She begged for forgiveness, her voice cracking as she pleaded for a financial bailout. She frantically outlined how they had lost everything, how Vernon's health was failing under the stress, how Kendra and Preston were facing complete ruin. She gripped the cold metal bars harder, pressing her tear-stained face near the iron, crying out that we were family, and family always takes care of each other in the end. I stood perfectly still, maintaining a comfortable distance from the gate, and listened to her entire pathetic speech without interrupting a single word. I let her drain every ounce of her dignity. I let her exhaust every manipulation tactic she had spent decades perfecting. When she finally finished gasping for breath and staring at me with hollow, desperate eyes, the silence between us stretched out heavy and absolute. I slowly reached into my designer clutch. My fingers bypassed the platinum credit cards and the keys to my new life. I pulled out exactly 2 crisp, freshly minted $100 bills. I stepped forward and silently slid the money through the narrow gap in the iron bars. Clarice looked down at the bills fluttering to the pavement, her expression shifting from desperate hope to utter, paralyzing confusion. "Here's the $200 you gave me when I was starving in college," I said, my voice cold, steady, and razor-sharp. "Figure it out." Clarice stared down at the cash on the asphalt, in absolute horror, the realization of her own past cruelty violently crashing down on her. I did not wait for a response. I turned my back on the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel small, and I walked calmly up the long, beautifully illuminated driveway toward my front door. I walked back into the massive, echoing foyer of my new estate, leaving the frantic sobbing and the chaos firmly locked outside the gate. The air conditioning washed over me cool and clean. I moved through the expansive living room, my heels clicking softly against the polished hardwood floors, and stepped out onto the sprawling back terrace. Malik was already waiting for me. He stood leaning against the glass balcony overlooking our private, perfectly landscaped grounds. In his hands, he held 2 crystal glasses filled with vintage ice-cold champagne. He handed me a glass, his eyes scanning my face with that deep, unwavering protective warmth that had carried me through the darkest moments of my life. We had officially secured our generational wealth. The $12 million acquisition was safely tucked into impenetrable trusts. Even better, earlier that morning, we had formally launched the legal framework for a new philanthropic foundation designed specifically to fund and support minority farmers in urban areas. My legacy was no longer tied to a family that demanded my failure. It was tied to a community I was actively helping to grow. Most importantly, I had successfully and surgically excised the toxic cancer of my biological family from my life forever. I sat beside Malik on the plush outdoor sofa, the night air wrapping around us like a protective blanket. I raised my crystal glass, clinking it gently against his. I offered a quiet, heartfelt toast to his sheer protective genius. He was the one who had orchestrated the ultimate test of loyalty. He was the one who had known exactly how my family would react if they thought I had nothing to offer them. He had handed them the shovel, and they had eagerly dug their own financial graves. I pulled my smartphone from my clutch and unlocked the screen. The notifications were still rolling in a desperate, pathetic stream of missed calls, voicemails, and messages from numbers I no longer cared to recognize. I opened the main family group chat, the exact digital space where the mockery, the condescension, and the betrayal had always been so casually orchestrated. I stared at the names listed at the top of the screen: Vernon, Clarice, Kendra, Preston. Without a single ounce of hesitation, I pressed the screen and hit block all. The chat vanished, wiped entirely from my device. The digital silence that followed was profound. I set the phone face down on the glass patio table. Taking a long, slow sip of the crisp champagne, I leaned back against Malik's shoulder. I looked out over the glittering, vibrant city lights of Atlanta spreading out into the horizon, feeling completely, finally, and undeniably at peace. True power does not require screaming to be heard, nor does it demand validation from those committed to misunderstanding you. The greatest revenge against a toxic family is not a dramatic confrontation, but achieving unshakable, independent success on your own terms. When you stop playing by their rules and quietly remove yourself from their manipulative orbit, their own arrogance and greed will ultimately orchestrate their downfall. Family is defined by mutual respect, genuine support, and unconditional love, not merely by shared bloodlines. Protect your peace, build your legacy in silence, and let your phenomenal success speak for itself. Share your own experiences of walking away from toxic relatives in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more satisfying stories of ultimate karma.